Thank you for joining us today for this presentation in honor of Eating Disorder Awareness Week. My name is Alexis Richardson. I'm a doctoral student in prevention science at Rutgers University. The focus of our conversation this next half hour is body image, and we have an expert here to tackle some common body image questions. Dr. Charlotte Markey is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University and the author of the Body Image book series, which includes a book for girls, boys, and young adults. Before talking about how to improve body image, let's start at the beginning. Charlotte, can you define body image and how it could play a role in the development of an eating disorder?
Hi, Alexis, and thanks for doing this with me. So body image can be defined pretty narrowly in terms of how people think and feel about their bodies, but I usually prefer a really broad definition. So it's not just those thoughts and feelings about our bodies, but a more general sense of comfort in our own skin. And I think thinking of body image broadly is important because we know it's correlated with so many things, including our relationship experiences, our health behaviors, especially when it comes to diet and exercise, and also other mental health concerns, including eating disorders. And so we know that body image, it's not necessarily always going to be predictive of disordered eating. So individuals who experience extremely high body dissatisfaction are at risk of disordered eating or an eating disorder. But there's not a perfect link. So we know that some people who experience an eating disorder are really suffering when it comes to their body image, but not everyone. So it's important to keep in mind these things are related, but one is not necessarily imperative for the other to emerge.
Okay, that makes sense. But before we go further, can you define a related term? What is diet culture, and can you explain how it could impact the perception of oneself?
So diet culture is sort of a system of beliefs, right? So we're all affected by diet culture. It's part of our larger culture. And diet culture equates fitness with health and moral virtue. So it promotes weight loss. So any ad you see for a diet or any kind of diet product is diet culture. But diet culture extends far beyond that because even basic sort of moralizing about food, when we're talking about some foods as good and some as bad, that's really a result of diet culture, which has equated food with having this moralistic value.
Okay. Speaking of diet culture, can you also explain how one can move beyond diet culture to achieve body liberation?
So body liberation is another really broad term, and it's an entire framework also for thinking about how people live in their bodies in the world. And that may sound sort of strange, but we all live in our bodies. We all have bodies, but some bodies are treated better than others. And we know that people who are larger tend to experience discrimination and oppressive circumstances in all sorts of settings, including as students in school, in employment settings, and even with their medical providers. And so when we think about body liberation, what we're thinking about is getting to a place where socially we are not judged by the size of our body, that everyone, regardless of their appearance, essentially, would be treated equally.
Thank you, for giving such a detailed response and explaining that. What steps do you believe people could take to heal their relationship with the body and food as well?
So I think it depends on where you're at when we talk about healing our relationships with food and our body, right? Some people probably need intensive treatment to heal those relationships. And some people might benefit just from reading a book, even. So I think it's important to do some investigation, right? Really be honest with yourself about what's going on with you. Is your body image affecting things like whether or not you want to go out with friends? Right. And similarly, people often will tell me, I don't want to do social things because um, I don't want to be around certain kinds of foods. Right. So that's a red flag that you probably need some sort of extra support, right? That you can begin, of course, to heal your body image and your relationship with food by getting information, getting evidence-based information, looking at books, following mental health professionals who do work in these spaces, maybe joining an online support group. But you also might benefit from seeing a professional with expertise in body image and eating disorders. And Anna, for example, who we're doing this for, they have a ton of resources, and you can call their helpline and you can get matched with someone who will help you sort through what resources are available to you. And you can even just look on other web pages um, and really look for someone who's a good fit for you in terms of what you need and what they can offer. Not every professional has experience working with these issues, and so those folks might not be quite as helpful. And if for any reason it turns out you don't have insurance or you're having a hard time getting resources given your access to healthcare, do know that there are some free options. And so you want to talk with the people at ANAD or another organization about what is free or low cost. Because sometimes even a few meetings with a professional trained in this area of work can really make a big difference. So it might be worth, if you can, spending a little bit of money for peace of mind and your health, really for the rest of your life.
Thank you for going over all of those options and factoring in accessibility. But moving on from diet culture, can we clarify some of our more nuanced terms? For example, can you explain the difference between body positivity, body acceptance, and body neutrality?
Yeah, so it's interesting because as a research scientist, I think sometimes I define these terms a little bit differently than other people do. But that's based on different ways that we try to measure these different constructs and also look at how they're related to one another. So when we're talking about body positivity, right, there's been a lot of debate about what that means. But I think no one, at least in research spaces, and I really don't think most people, even who do clinical work in this area, believe that body positivity means feeling positive all the time, right? Like no one feels positive about anything all the time. Like that's, it's kind of silly to think that life is like that simple that you would just feel positive about anything all the time. So body positivity, yes, it does encompass joy and positive experiences in your body, but it also means self-respect and taking care of your body and focusing on your functionality and your health. And it incorporates all of those other aspects of how we view and treat our bodies. Body neutrality is sometimes described as like this new approach that's really different from body positivity, except that it's not that different, right? What body neutrality has is it has all of those things I just talked about, right? Like respect for the self, taking care of yourself, being accepting of yourself. It just has less of sort of the joy and the positive affect surrounding one's body, right? So for some people, feeling really positive at all may feel really far off and just not like an achievable goal. And if it helps you to think in terms of body neutrality, like I'm just going to focus on taking good care of myself, making sure I'm nourished well, making sure I'm active and sleeping and managing stress and enjoying people in my life, those are all really important for mental health in general. So if you're doing all of those things, then that may look a lot like body neutrality. But guess what? If you're doing all of those things, over time, it's likely that you might start to experience some joy and some happiness, which then would be what some of us would at least call body positivity. And body acceptance, I think, is what it sounds like, right? So are you accepting? Are you sort of content with your body? And are you trying to be appreciative of what your body can do? Right? So it's not, I think it overlaps actually a lot with the concept of body neutrality.
Thank you for clarifying these terms for the audience's ease of understanding throughout the discussion. Can we discuss how culture, gender, and sexuality play a role in one's body image?
Yeah. So first of all, it's important to know that our body image is largely a sociocultural construction, right? We don't come out of the womb with this like inherent biologically driven sense of body image. It's really a psychological construct that develops through interactions with the world around us. So we live in a family where they talk about bodies in really restrictive and negative ways, and then maybe we internalize that and develop negative feelings about our own bodies. And so that's how sort of our surrounding or our culture, right? So our culture is a very broad thing, but also may be experienced more directly through our families when we're young. Okay. So culture is what gives us a body image in some ways. Okay. In terms of gender, there's a long-standing assumption that body image and eating concerns are most prevalent among adolescent girls. And we simply know now that that's just not true. We know that the rates of body dissatisfaction and eating problems have risen or at least have been identified more often among boys and men. They may not suffer to the exact extent of girls and women, but they're by no means exempt from these concerns. And we also know that individuals who are non-binary or trans may experience the most body dissatisfaction and eating problems than their cis peers who are identifying as male or female. Because oftentimes living in a body that isn't treated as well by people around you or isn't regarded as positively is internalized. And so that can be just a really, really difficult thing for one to then make peace with one's own body. In terms of sexuality, there's some overlap in some of the literature here and how we discuss all of these different terms, but um, sexuality, we do know that individuals who identify with the LGBTQ community may be at heightened risk for body dissatisfaction and eating problems. And there used to be a belief that, in particular, lesbian women were exempt from these concerns, sort of that they didn't experience them, that they had a whole different set of beauty ideals. And again, we now know from more recent research that's just not the case. So certainly our context is important, not just in the development of a body image, but the development of whether or not our bodies are experienced more positively or more negatively, whether or not the people around us are supportive of us really taking care of and respecting, trusting, and nurturing ourselves. And gender and sexuality play an important role in how all of this is experienced.
Um,
So let me try to answer that one again. And while I'm doing that, maybe you can come up with more questions and I can just try to get this little piece here edited together. Okay.
okay.
All right. Um, so people who are experiencing dissatisfaction with their bodies or any sort of disordered eating or an eating disorder may actually exhibit some of the same behaviors. So we may start to see people exercise excessively, go to the gym really regularly. And of course, on the surface, that may seem really healthy, but if it's a real shift in behavior and it's a lot of time someone's devoting to physical activity, then that's potentially problematic. People may change how they dress if they're not feeling comfortable in their own skin. So they may wear baggier clothes or really try to hide their bodies. We also, though, do see sometimes that people may be insecure and may actually show off their bodies because they're looking for a response from other people. So, again, it's not always the same how people experience concerns. Anytime anyone changes their diet sort of dramatically, it's something to keep an eye on, especially for young people who may be still maturing and developing and may need to, um, get the proper nourishment to complete puberty and to grow. So we don't want people to cut out entire food groups, like sugar or fat or carbs or anything like that, because it's possible then that this is just one way to really restrict themselves, and that can be really damaging if people aren't getting enough nourishment or enough variety of nourishment. um, so there's a lot of things that can be signs, but I think also anytime you are concerned, it can be important to just pursue that concern in a gentle and constructive way, right? It's better to not just let something go and then regret it later if someone ends up seriously ill.
Thank you for such a thoughtful response. We've gone over the family system and the family environment. What role would you say the parents play in cases of young children struggling with body image in terms of how to best help them heal?
Yeah, parents often ask me about this because parents will often say, like, I don't really even feel good about my own body. How am I going to help my kid grow up and feel better than I do? And I think that's a legitimate issue that just a lot of people struggle with. So, first of all, no, you're not alone, right? Like, it's great that you're thinking of trying to do better by your child, and you are not alone in having this experience. And then I would say one of the best things you can try to do is work on your own body image so that you can set a good example for your kids. And even simple things like really making a point not to disparage your own or others' bodies in front of your children is really important. You don't want your kids growing up feeling like everyone judges everyone's body. And that's the message we give to kids if that's how we talk about bodies, right? And you may think often to say something negative about your body. Many of us grew up feeling like that was a perfectly normal way to talk about our own bodies. But you also may find that as you do it less for the benefit of your child, you think it less, and your own body image can improve if you're spending less energy disparaging your own body. So it's a little bit of a fake it till you make it game in some cases where you can really work on pretending essentially that you feel better than you do, and trying to exert some sense of confidence so that then your children will grow up feeling that way. And if you just pretend long enough, some people do start to really feel better. I think also, there are a lot of great resources out there for parents. There are a number of great books that have been written that are for parents. Or, of course, I'm biased, but I always tell people, like, I love the idea so much of the body image book for girls and boys being read with kids and their moms or dads or siblings or aunts or whoever it may be, right? Like, use it as a vehicle for conversation about these issues. So if it's a way for you to just start talking about this with your kids in a proactive, constructive way, I think that's really, really valuable. Um, and of course, just make sure you aren't teasing your kid about their appearance, saying negative things about their bodies, because a lot of kids are very sensitive to that and they remember, right? Even kids who um, end up with eating disorders later, oftentimes will tell me they were teased by a sibling. Siblings tend to be especially problematic in this regard. And so if you are seeing that among, your children, you really want to step in and say, no, like that's not how we talk about bodies.
As a parent yourself and somebody who's an expert in this field, do you believe that schools have a responsibility in the health setting to educate children on body image?
Oh, what a great question. I think that schools can play such a valuable role. We know that a lot of kids are bullied about their appearance. It's in some research cited as the number one thing that kids are bullied about. And so if schools can really help there to have anti-bullying policies that don't just focus on gender or race or ethnicity or sexuality, but also size and appearance and ability status, all of this is important. And so schools can play a really important role in eliminating bullying among kids, which we know is unfortunately common. But schools can also get evidence-based information to kids. They have a captive audience. They have kids who are there to learn. And unfortunately, oftentimes the resources that are shared in school settings are not very current, right? That sometimes nutrition information is very like food pyramid focused or food plate or whatever it is. That's not necessarily, we know now, the best way to talk about food. And body image is hardly talked about at all, and mental health is hardly talked about at all. And media literacy, which is an incredibly important um, contributor to body image in this day and age, is not discussed at all really either. And yet that could contribute to any kind of public health effort to improve mental health broadly, eating and body image in particular.
Do you consider eating disorders a public health issue?
Absolutely. I mean, I think any issue that's a health issue that can be prevented or can be treated can be viewed as a public health issue, right? I think we're all too quick to assume that it only becomes a quote unquote public health issue if like the entire public is affected. But that's not really how health works. And I think we did see this during the pandemic, right? Like, even if you're healthy now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be the one sick tomorrow, right? And so even if it's not a contagious illness, right? Eating disorders are not contagious per se. You may be fine now, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow you won't be, or someone you love and care for deeply won't be ill and won't need that help. And so that's why I think we really need to be investing in public health efforts, things like body image education and media literacy, that can be preventative, and can also maybe serve in an intervention sort of capacity, because the prevalence of these concerns are such that someone we know will be affected, right? If it's not us directly, it will be us indirectly.
So we've talked about the environment, we've talked about culture, gender, and sexuality. Do you know of any other indicators that may place someone at risk for an eating disorder?
Well, we have a growing amount of more biological and genetic based research that's emerged. And we know that individuals are at risk based on those more biological factors. And I don't do this kind of research, but we know from twin studies and other sorts of genetic studies that individuals who have first degree relatives who experience an eating disorder are more at risk themselves. So not just, I think, an experience an eating disorder, but it may even be as much in terms of what type of eating disorder and what types of treatments may be best. So I don't think the research yet can direct us in terms of all of that, but that may be where we're headed in the future.
Oh, that is very interesting. Thank you. You mentioned that you wrote the body image book for girls, the body image book for boys, and you released Adultish. Do you have any other books planned?
I do. Yeah, I'm hoping to be working on a book for women who are in their, like 30s to 50s in the near future. And there's actually a second edition of the body image book for girls that will be out in about a year. And I'm really excited about that because it's gotten a little bit longer and has updated information because that was 5 years ago now that that came out, which means I was really writing it like 6 years ago. So super, super excited for that to get out into the world in the coming year.
Those all sound very interesting. I know I'll have to be reading one of those books as your student. Um,
I
I
don't
believe,
make you. Don't let people think that I make you do that.
well, I feel obligated to, doing research for you being in your class. I'll definitely read it. I believe that was all the questions I prepared for today. Do you have anything to add before we conclude our discussion?
I guess I would just say that people don't often think of body image or body dissatisfaction as something that needs treatment, right? They think that you have to have a serious eating disorder in order to pursue treatment. And I think that that's just simply not true, that we know that people who get support, and that can look like a million different things. It could be reading books, it could be going to support groups, it could be going to a therapist. Um, but people who get support surrounding these issues and improve their own body image may stave off an eating disorder and may improve their quality of life tremendously. I talk with so many women who are nearly my age, or in their 30s or 40s or 50s, or even older, who still, since the time they were young, are experiencing serious concerns about their bodies and maybe experiencing disordered eating. And it's just decades of some people's lives where these issues take up a ton of time and mental space and energy and really wreak havoc on mental health. So you don't have to have a clinical diagnosis to get treatment and to seek out support for yourself. And in fact, it's best to not wait until you have a serious problem to seek out support and treatment. So we all deserve that, I believe.
I agree with you. Thank you for including me on this discussion, and thank you for allowing me to learn more from you.
Thanks for doing this with me.
Of course.
Happy Eating Disorders Awareness Week, everybody.
Happy Eating Disorder Awareness Week.